Ladies and gentlemen, this is internet personality Vangelus, and it's time for another debut piece from another new, I think, unofficial transforming robot company. The Chosen Prime has loaned me the first release of Generation Toys' Gravity Builder team, the Scrap and Scrapper lookalike called Scraper. Yeah, ditching 1P went farther than I thought it would. This pre-production copy is so close to complete, he even has his box. And what a fancy box! It's all satin black with custom-cut foam inside, and makes a hardcore opening impression on the piece. And given that this is a post-Combiner Wars unofficial Constructicon in 2015, he can use all the help he could get to hold on to anybody's interest. Scraper's a payloader as you'd expect, but he catches the eye pretty quickly with his industrial bulk and intense surface detailing. The tires are big, thick, and rubberized. The windows are smoky translucent. There isn't a ton of paint, but I feel there's just enough to break up the green and pick out a few gray and silver details. There's also a bunch of big, bold safety striping, and the flat finish of the green plastic causes a lot of natural shading and highlighting in person. Double and this thing is a fistful and a half of surprisingly weighty construction. Its size is easily comparable to the Combiner Wars Scrapper, but much more dense and beefy. The scoop brings about as much play value as one could ask for, with 4 points of articulation and some ratcheting action on the hinge that connects everything to the front section of the payloader. It can also sit at a perfect angle to just stay above the ground and allow Scraper to roll around happily on his rubberized and hopefully silicone durable tires. This guy has a packed transformation with a ton of moving parts, and struck me as incredibly daunting in other reviewers' advanced coverage, but I'm happy to report that while he's complex, he's by no means a nightmare, and a lot of that comes down to two big factors. First, just about every major motion involves very obvious tabs and pegs that make it clear where stuff is supposed to go. Second, Scraper totally transforms in contained chunks. In general, his legs independently become legs, his arms then become arms. You don't have to partially transform stuff and then loop it around other partially transformed stuff. Everything happens in a fairly unconfusing order, though the specifics of his forearms are by far the trickiest thing that'll take a cycle or two to get used to. Remember, those spring-loaded hands can pull out to click into place as well. I guess I'm just pleasantly surprised. I set myself up to expect intensely complicated tactile gibberish, and ended up with a robot that I can transform in about 90 to 100 seconds without much issue. Scraper's robot mode reveals Generation Toys' biggest selling point for the Gravity Builders, a very unique aesthetic among unofficial Constructicons. This guy is beefed out in a very, very particular style of angled puff, which reminds me of the better end of the old Dreamwave house style. Less marshmallow, more roboroids. Combined with a pleasant natural slope to the robot's stance, this aesthetic is overall very interesting to handle and look at in 3 dimensions. But is Scraper a good scrapper? Kinda, yeah. His proportions are pretty good in the context of a thick and heavy robot man with a scoop sitting behind his head. The big-ass shoulder tires are striking, and the color layout is pretty cool. I dig the flat raisin purple against the shiny gunmetal and matte lime green, but the part that weakens the image for me is the head sculpt. It's not terrible to look at, and damn does it do some nice light piping, but the shapes are all off. The faceplate angles down at his nose rather than up, and he doesn't have a flat ball cap plate on the top of his head. He just looks a bit too generic to me, while Combiner Wars Scrapper and even TFC's Structor pulled off head sculpts that spoke a louder message of "I'm Scrapper!" Also on the weaker end of things is Scraper's gun. Well, not the gun itself, as it looks fine, but the way he holds it. His knuckles open, and the palm curl within is supposed to do most of the gripping, only it doesn't do it extremely well. The gun will hold in fine, but falls out if you bump it too much. And the weird thing is, there's a little slit in there that looks like it was going to be part of a far more secure tab or rail system for the gun handle. I wonder what happened. For all his puffy bulk, this guy's still got some pretty good posability, like a ball socket jointed head that's got a little bit of waggle in addition to its ability to look around. And if you use the transformation panel just a little bit, he can look down in a fairly convincing way. So that's pretty cool. His shoulders come out like this, revealing this kind of detailed stuff. And that's just a friction joint, but then forward and backward motion is on a clickety ratchet. And if you use these in tandem, generally it works pretty well. If you start bumping into the shovel back here, or sorry, the scoop, you can move it out of the way if you so choose. Pop it back in. There you go. Robert is your father's brother, as the saying goes. There is a bicep swivel, and then an elbow joint. Now, the instructions tell you to transform this guy with this black bit up around here, where it has a spot to fit in, but then it also entirely impedes the elbow articulation, making it go about that far as opposed to that far. I don't really get it, because if you swing this thing back around this way, like the way that I thought naturally this should work, this panel that was over the spring-loaded fist has like a little C-clip, and the black railing here pops right into that C-clip pretty happily, which means that it has a place to go, and it holds this panel in place down here. So it just feels like this is really what you're supposed to be doing, and it's lovely. Also, there's another transformation joint for another mode, which is here, which allows for a little bit of inward curve without having to turn the biceps if you so choose to do that. There is a wrist swivel, and one of them knuckle joints in the hand. Doesn't look too bad when it's open. It looks a little bit thin from here, but if you just open it a little bit, the natural sculpt kind of works. There's a big old waist joint. No clicking on here, it's just big and solid. And it runs very close to the hip skirts. And these hip skirts are kind of a bummer. They look best when they're sort of angled in like this. But if you do start moving the leg forward, you know, they can get out of the way or just pop right off. They're on kind of weedy little ball joints, and they don't feel super great. Like, you know, they work, but then you'll want to push it back in here, and then if the top angle of this little skirt like comes like this, it can be kind of tricky to get it back down to where you want it, and if it's up and a bit crooked, it gets in the way of the waist swivel and potentially gets popped off by that. The skirts are just a little bit annoying. Like there, I just popped it off, and well, here, I'll pop it off, push it back on, and now I like how things look. I feel like maybe things could have gone better there, but I'm not precisely sure how. It just doesn't feel up to par with the rest of this package. The hip, as you heard, is a ratcheting hip, just forward and backwards. It's friction out in this direction. There's a thigh swivel. There's a transformation joint here, which is very easy to accidentally set off, and it doesn't really like lock in at all. And I'm hoping that perhaps one last tweak on this toy is getting some kind of soft detented click in there somehow to hold this together, because as it is way too easy to do that and split his leg open in a real funny looking way. There is a ratcheted knee joint down below all that mess, and it works quite happily for a 90-degree-ish bend. And then the ankles are super freeform. The toes you might think are jointed, but they aren't really, because the toe and heel pieces only really fold like that, which does nothing to help with anything. But they are attached on this like completely separate system where they can go forwards and backwards pretty well. And then they've got, like, from this transformation joint, a huge amount of ankle motion, and in tandem with this, like, you can even reposition the foot if you want, like where it might be out of view in a pose where it's back here. You can go kind of crazy with it just for the sake of stability. And this guy looks pretty cool when he's doing stuff. I would not say he's, like, super posable, but given the style of his design, I think he's well posable enough. Like, you just look at this guy, you look at how big and puffy he is, and you kind of think, like, I'm not expecting him to do acrobatics, but hey, at least he can, like, properly and solidly stand around and look menacing as per his aesthetic. So I'd call it an average success. Like, everything's hit the right marks. There's nothing that feels like it's missing. Some kind of torso crunch would have been cool, but there's so much going on in here, I don't know where it would have fit. I'm digging it. Scraper turns into a leg, and it's easier to start that off from vehicle mode. Did you see that cut I made? God damn, that was cool! Anyway, this is a transformation into leg mode, and there's a lot of dedicated engineering for Scraper's limb conversion that doesn't even get touched when he's a standalone playpiece. I think it's really cool how the cockpit block gets integrated into the kneecap area to clean up and smooth up Gravity Builder's shin, but some of the tiny panel motions begin to tread the realm of slightly too finicky for what they accomplish. The arms get in on that kind of action too, with those ladder and railing parts flying all over the place. However, in the end, this is all brought together by the returning quality of copious solidity and clarity through obvious tabs and pegs. And hey, it's kind of cool to see a scrapper foot actually have a fairly clean and defined heel, because that's the big win and hope-inducing aspect of this mode. It's very solid and defined, taking the natural messiness of a payloader leg and smoothing it up a little bit to enhance its puffy beef hood and visually imply just how much weight it's supposed to be bearing. There's also an ankle tilt, as one may have come to expect by now, but unfortunately there's no forward-backward tilt or toe action. You can try, but then the scoop just starts dangling and flailing like a broken foot. Man, by now I didn't think I'd have any interest in another take on the Constructicons at this scale, but I've got to hand it to Generation Toy, because they have put in a titanic effort to create a new Voyager-sized scrapper that can justify its own existence. The aesthetic and weighty construction are so standout and impressive, and I've got to dive a little deep to call out negatives on this guy, like his weird weedy skirt armor and fairly poor gun-holding technique. He's a very strong piece that makes a damn fine first impression on the part of Generation Toy. But he's also a roughly $100 third-party Constructicon, of which there will be 6. And for all his qualities, I cannot just sit here and say this is the next definitive Devastator on the horizon. The big reason to look into these guys is their very specific and unique aesthetic. There are so many Devastators on the market, it's honestly quite a compliment to say that the Gravity builders appear to have any justifiable shelf life whatsoever. If Scraper's any indication, they'll be built real well, so it all comes down to looks. Or whether or not you want a smaller Megatron figure to go with him, as Generation Toy are making such a companion piece, which the Chosen Prime is throwing in for free if you pre-order all 6 of these guys before the first one comes in stock. Anyway, this has been Internet Personality Vangelus, and the most frightening realization I had while making this video was my readiness to collect more Constructicons, before the realities of personal finance stepped in. I think I am that guy that wouldn't bat an eye at having 7 or 8 Devastators in the same collection. Help me.